As the icy grasp of winter descended over Europe in the waning weeks of 1944, the earth-shattering battles rattling the continent began to lose momentum. After their awe-inspiring breakout from Normandy, the Allies were beginning to settle in near the German border. The Wehrmacht, weakened and demoralized like a vanquished beast, struggled to rise from its knees. For the Allies, triumph in Europe loomed closely, only a matter of time. Yet there was one man whose fury should never be underestimated: Adolf Hitler. Disregarding the counsel of his advisors to muster his troops for the defense of Germany, the Führer resolved to unleash one final devastating German offensive in World War II. December 15th dawned, and the unsuspecting Allied troops were about to be caught entirely off guard. It was only just the day before that 21st Army Group Commander Bernard Montgomery had confidently proclaimed, quote, "The inadequacies of German manpower, equipment and resources preclude any offensive action on their part." The young Allied recruits had been lulled into a false sense of security, but their world was about to unravel. Like a storm of thunder and wrath, a surprise German force was to bear down upon the US troops. The sheer might and numbers of the Germans would be so staggering they seemed to have materialized from thin air. This new blitzkrieg was to be a relentless assault, and the unyielding German bulge it produced would consume the Ardennes as the American front line was shattered. Still, amidst the chaos, a beacon of defiance emerged. Deep within the frozen woodlands of Belgium's Lanzerath Ridge, Lyle Book Jr. and his band of 18 men refused to yield. Together, these fearless American warriors would need to hold their ground against an entire battalion of over 500 German soldiers. If successful, their actions could single-handedly threaten to unravel Hitler's plans. It would send ripples that would reverberate throughout the remainder of the war. In the aftermath of the crushing German defeat at Stalingrad on February 2, 1943, the advance of the Red Army seemed unstoppable. The Soviets, with their seemingly unending stock of manpower and their thirst for retribution, bore down relentlessly. Towards the end of 1944, Hitler was forced to concede that Berlin would soon succumb to this Soviet onslaught, unless, by some stroke of strategic genius, German forces on the Western Front could be redirected to defend the East. However, the situation in the West was scarcely less dire. The formidable Western Allies were poised at the very doorstep of Germany, having executed a masterful breakout from Normandy. Yet in Hitler's mind, these forces were more susceptible to fracture than the monolithic Red Army. The German dictator perceived the alliance between Britain and the US as tenuous, convinced that a single decisive blow could sever the fragile bond between them and coax America into negotiating a peace settlement. This would, in turn, enable Germany to concentrate its remaining forces on repelling the Soviet threat. But the odds were stacked against Germany. Depleted strategic resources, a dwindling pool of manpower, and battered equipment made launching a sudden offensive strike all the more challenging. It would demand the total, unreserved commitment of every remaining German soldier on the Western Front. The battle plan was clear. Hitler would resurrect the tactics that had served him well 4 years earlier, unleashing a lightning-fast assault through the Ardennes with his most formidable formation, the 6th Panzer Army. The German forces would puncture the US lines in the Ardennes, ford the River Meuse, and then capture the city of Antwerp, cleaving the Allied front and forcing the Allies into a similar situation to that of the evacuation at Dunkirk. The daring gambit teetered on a razor's edge. The Germans could deliver a crushing, humiliating blow to the Allies, forcing them to re-evaluate their commitment to the war. Or they could completely squander the Wehrmacht's last remnants of strength, leaving them vulnerable to an unstoppable Allied invasion of Germany. Hitler didn't hesitate or toy with the idea of adopting a defensive posture. With all chips on the table, he unleashed the fierce Ardennes offensive. The Allies would know it as the Battle of the Bulge. The element of surprise was paramount for the success of the Ardennes offensive. The Allies needed to be convinced that the Germans were incapable of launching an attack for it to be successful. To achieve this, the German military mobilized hundreds of thousands of men who stealthily traversed the forests under the cloak of darkness. By day, they concealed themselves in local villages and towns, stowing their vehicles in barns or camouflaging them with foliage. Allied warplanes scouring the countryside would see no evidence of a burgeoning enemy force. Unbeknownst to the German soldiers, they were pawns in a top-secret operation, the details of which were withheld from even the regimental commanders until the 11th hour. Only the uppermost echelon of the German command was aware of the offensive, and even then, numerous high-ranking officers counseled Hitler to devote what remained of their troops and resources to Germany's defense. But by this time in the war, Hitler had long ago stopped pretending to listen to his generals and dismissed his advisors' concerns. As the principal attack force covertly assembled, Otto Skorzeny, German SS commando and the man responsible for rescuing Benito Mussolini a year prior, led a covert group behind enemy lines, disguised as US and British soldiers in Operation Greif. The English-speaking German agents wreaked havoc on the Allies, sabotaging supply lines, communications facilities and signposts, misdirecting traffic and sowing confusion in the crucial hours preceding the attack. The group even managed to divert an entire Allied regiment off course. Simultaneously, another special operations group executed Operation Stosser, a daring nighttime paratroop drop behind Allied lines to capture a vital road junction near Malmedy in Belgium. The secrecy of the overall German deployment proved wildly successful in tricking the Allies into a false sense of security, and the Allies never quite connected the dots of the German special operations. Such a rapid mobilization under strained conditions pushed the Wehrmacht supply lines to the breaking point, but it was now or never. As German forces, both within and beyond the Allied lines, readied themselves for the onslaught, the unsuspecting American and British troops remained oblivious to the imminent storm. On the morning of December 16, 1944, the German army was given the go-ahead to unleash what it hoped would be a final, devastating blitzkrieg upon Europe. In the early hours of December 16th, the dreaded 6th Panzer Army, commanded by the infamous Sepp Dietrich, launched a vicious and unanticipated attack against US positions. The assault caught countless American fighters off guard, still in their tents, desperately scrambling to grab their rifles and equipment as German tanks mercilessly overwhelmed their positions. Defying Hitler's orders to initiate the attack with a colossal artillery barrage, Hasso von Manteuffel and the 5th Panzer Army opted for a stealthier approach, silently crossing the Sauer River to surprise the slumbering Americans. The abrupt and brutal onslaught sent many newer US recruits into a state of sheer panic. Some fled in abject terror, while others, according to reports, were reduced to cowering in fear. In an instant, the front lines along the Ardennes had been transformed into a feverish nightmare for the woefully unprepared Allies. The Germans achieved immediate and resounding victories, smashing one Allied position after another and skillfully penetrating deep into French and Belgian territory. This rapid advance, covering nearly 60 miles in the first few days, gave rise to the infamous German bulge in the front lines, signaling the onset of an arduous and harrowing struggle for all involved. However, not all Allied combatants were fresh to the front, and not all succumbed to fear. Amid the chaos and destruction, a select few American soldiers demonstrated unwavering courage and resilience. In the ensuing hours, their extraordinary bravery and determination would earn them an enduring place in the annals of history. The 18 American servicemen of the 394th Intelligence and Reconnaissance Platoon were an elite, albeit somewhat inexperienced, cadre deployed to the treacherous Ardennes. Among them were college-educated graduates of the now-defunct Army Specialized Training Program, which had prepared future personnel in engineering, foreign languages, and medicine. Commanding the platoon was one of the youngest officers in the entire Army, the 20-year-old prodigy, Lieutenant Lyle Book. Comprising 2 reconnaissance squads, each with 9 men, the platoon was highly trained for surveillance efforts, but ill-equipped for direct engagement with the Germans. Their primary objective was to act as a specialized intelligence unit, collecting information on enemy coordinates and size and relaying it to the regimental intelligence officer. They operated patrol vehicles and observation posts and coordinated intelligence activities across the regiment to accomplish this. Stationed in a brick building in Hunningen in Belgium near the German border, they utilized the basement as a storage facility for military combat rations. On the fateful morning of December 16th, the two squadrons detected a formidable German advance in the neighboring town. The Americans were effectively cut off, with communications to higher headquarters severely disrupted and additional support nowhere in sight. At the time, most American forces in the area were assaulting the Siegfried Line through Wallerschild, a mere 5 miles north of the platoon's position. Although they anticipated a counterattack, the sheer magnitude of the German force far exceeded their wildest expectations. Previous reports by the military brass had depicted the Wehrmacht as being in shambles. As the vast horde marched toward the US lines, the GIs could not understand where the massive formations had come from. Undaunted, Lieutenant Buch and his team resolved to establish fortifications at Lanzerath, atop a hill nestled on the forest's edge, overlooking a vast expanse of pasture. Capitalizing on the remnants of foxholes left by a previous unit, they dug deeper, enlarging the spaces to accommodate additional soldiers. Concealed beneath pine logs, their position commanded a 300-yard stretch of the ridgeline to the northeast. It afforded them a clear vantage point over the fork in the road to their left. As snow fell, the Americans seamlessly blended into their surroundings, hidden from the prying eyes of the enemy below. They utilized a nearby log hut as a warming shelter and armed themselves with an impressive arsenal secured by Bach, which included additional carbines, automatic rifles, and a light machine gun. A .50 caliber machine gun mounted on a jeep, also obtained through Buch's ingenuity, completed their brawny cache. The platoon meticulously positioned the jeep, ensuring it held a strategic advantage over the road. With hourly jeep patrols to maintain contact between the flanks and monitor enemy movements, the team that had been intended to serve as the eyes and ears of the 394th Infantry Regiment was thrust into a role for which they were scarcely prepared. Their new and sole directive was to hold the area at all costs, and they clung to the hope that reinforcements would soon arrive. Buch would later recount in an interview, quote, "We weren't trained to occupy a defensive position in the front lines. We were trained to patrol and get information about the enemy. Yet, they would now have to go above and beyond." As the Americans braced for the onslaught, on the other side of the battlefield, the German 9th Regiment prepared to accomplish their mission, to spearhead the advance of the 6th Panzer Army by assaulting the village of Lanzerath and razing it to the ground. German commanders wanted to save their available armor vehicles for tougher battles ahead. They deemed the infantry of the 9th Regiment more than capable of taking the small village that stood in their way and weeding out any isolated American units in the area. By that point in the war, most German units were composed of a mix of seasoned veterans and a large number of untested young men who had barely any experience with firearms. During the invasion of Normandy, the German 3rd Fallschirmjäger Division, known for its effectiveness in combat, was severely depleted. It had been rebuilt with members from Luftwaffe field regiments to maintain German morale. These new recruits were equipped with the advanced STG-44 selective fire rifle, rifle grenades, and various other armaments. However, they were still green, and thanks to Nazi Germany's unwavering propaganda machine, under the impression that the American soldiers were highly demoralized and unwilling to put up a fight. From this reformed 3rd Fallschirmjäger Division, the 9th Regiment was tasked with leading the attack on Lanzerath and clearing the village. They would then proceed to attack the towns of Honsfeld and Bullingen, where they believed they would face the bulk of the US troops. The 6th Panzer Army, spearheaded by Kampfgruppe Piper, was to follow up immediately, attacking the route by Losheimer Graben directly after Lanzerath had been taken. Despite Germany's recent losses and the fact that they were being crushed by foreign armies on two fronts, the morale of these German servicemen remained strong. They saw themselves as the ultimate defense of their homeland and were prepared to fight tooth and nail to protect it. The letters the German soldiers wrote home at the time revealed a surprising sense of optimism and determination. They believed victory was possible and perceived their advance as unstoppable. The German forces advanced through the heavily wooded areas. The 500 men from the 9th Fallschirmjäger Regiment and 50 from the Fusilier Regiment marched, utterly unaware of the tiny American platoon about to make their lives a living hell. As the 9th Regiment advanced toward the outnumbered American platoon, they knew the might of the forces that marched behind them. Over 500,000 troops, 1,400 tanks, and 2,400 warplanes were now moving to unleash the wrath of the Third Reich one last time. In years, most German troops had not seen a German offensive of such scope. They were intoxicated by the idea that this was the moment for them to turn the tide of the war in their favor and continue the dream of the 1,000-year Reich. Little did they know that they were about to be punished by fewer than 24 American soldiers. The ominous rumble of a 2-hour-long rolling barrage signaled the beginning of the attack. Huddled in their foxholes, the I and R platoon braced for impact, gritting their teeth as the earth trembled beneath them. Miraculously, the foxholes provided just enough protection, and the platoon emerged mostly unscathed. However, their reprieve was short-lived, as they discovered the German soldiers had cut their landlines, leaving them isolated and unable to call for backup. Desperate for information, the regiment radioed orders for the platoon to hold their position and send out a patrol. As the patrol crept through the shattered landscape, they watched in horror as a massive German infantry formation advanced under the glow of giant searchlights near Losheim. As dawn broke, Bork spotted a long column of around 500 German troops marching towards them. 18 men against 500. It was ludicrous, and Buch contacted regimental headquarters to request permission to withdraw and engage in a delaying action. However, he was instructed to hold their position at all costs and wait for reinforcements from the 3rd Battalion. German soldiers continued to advance, and Buch sent some of his men to assist in various defensive and observational positions. Skirmishes erupted around the village, with the American soldiers engaging in close combat with the advancing German forces. The passionate German troopers were highly inexperienced and overconfident, and soon their reckless zeal would make them pay. In one instance, Krieger, an American soldier, single-handedly engaged and neutralized most of a German platoon by himself, using the .50 caliber gun mounted on the jeep. At their ridgetop position, Bork and his platoon prepared to surprise the German forces as they advanced. However, a young girl from the village unknowingly alerted the Germans to the Americans' presence. The Germans immediately took cover, and a fierce firefight ensued between the outnumbered American platoon and the advancing German infantry. Discovered and significantly outgunned, the Americans dug into their reinforced positions. They placed their hopes on their experience and the rehearsed routine they had meticulously devised. As the freezing skirmish devolved into one blistering gust of bullets after another, the American soldiers were taken aback by the inexperienced tactics employed by the German troops as they charged head-on and bunched together in the open. Some of the Americans would later claim it was similar to, quote, shooting clay ducks in California at an amusement park. Several Germans were cut down trying to climb over the 4-feet-high barbed wire fence that divided the field. Germans littered the snow as their casualties mounted. The Americans allowed German medics to remove the wounded under a white flag, but they soon resumed fire after noticing suspicious activity. The American platoon fiercely defended their position throughout the day, inflicting humiliating losses on the German forces. The deep foxholes and the heavy snow that had fallen during the night made the American position mostly invisible to the Germans. They knew where the fire was coming from, but could not effectively strike back. Lieutenant Buch was determined to fight to the last bullet, even as the ominous threat of the 1st SS Panzer Division loomed. But the enemy's relentless fire eventually took its toll, obliterating the I and R platoon's radio and severing their last lifeline to the outside world. As dusk drew near within the war-torn frozen forests of the Ardennes, with their own ammunition supplies dwindling and unable to contact regimental headquarters for further instructions, the American fighters realized they would probably not make it out alive from Lanzereth Ridge. Slowly and painfully, the German soldiers began to adapt. They switched from total frontal attacks to covering maneuvers along the roadside ditches, their rifles trained on the American foxholes. The air exploded with the deafening roar of gunfire as both sides exchanged a hail of bullets. Each bullet fired from an American gun left the defenders more and more concerned as their supplies declined. The Germans launched assault after assault, their frustration mounting as the snow-blanketed American platoon remained all but invisible. Despite being vastly outnumbered, the Americans' superior defensive position wreaked havoc on the Fallschirmjäger regiment. The harrowing firefight between the 18 men and the group of over 500 raged on for hours. It repelled 3 concerted assaults as the air grew thick with smoke and the acrid smell of gunpowder spread across the battlefield. When the third wave of attacks had been beaten back, hundreds of Germans were left scattered over the dirty snow. At the same time, only 1 American soldier had been wounded. Yet despite their legendary triumph, the platoon knew they couldn't hold out much longer. As Buch later recounted in an interview with the New York Times, quote, "We were frightened and we were tired, and it was like a hellish nightmare. It seemed it would never end. We couldn't get any help. It seemed like it was all hopeless." Exhausted, freezing and dangerously low on ammunition, Lieutenant Buch desperately attempted to seek reinforcements or a formal withdrawal order. However, just as Buch was about to signal a fighting retreat, the Germans outsmarted the tiny American platoon by flanking them, penetrating their lines and overrunning their foxholes. But even in victory, the German losses did not stop. As they seized the ridge, several attackers were taken out by grenades rigged to wires and triggered by hidden American fighters. Unexpectedly, the Germans didn't put down the defenders where they laid. Instead, Buch was dragged out of his position by a German officer with a machine gun. Surely there must be hundreds of other American soldiers, and the Germans wanted to know where they were. Having no answer, Buch knew his life was over when the officer placed the weapon against his back and pulled the trigger. But then, almost miraculously, the gun clicked. It was out of ammunition. At that moment, Buch and the German officer were hit by bullets. The German officer was seriously wounded, while Buch suffered a wound in his calf. Taking over the scene, German Sergeant Vince Kuhlbach then grabbed Buch and questioned who was in command. When Buch replied that he was, Kuhlbach could scarcely believe that the young American had led the defensive effort with only 18 men. As he and his men were taken away, Lieutenant Buch had no idea what they had just done. At the moment, their capture seemed like a crushing defeat, and he would bitterly blame himself for not retreating sooner and allowing his men to be captured. The fate before them was as dark as their last stand on Lanzerath Ridge. The I and R platoon members who could walk were sent to Germany, while the seriously wounded were loaded onto trucks and eventually put on trains. Buch crammed into a single railroad cattle car with 71 other POWs, traveled for days without food or water. By Christmas, 7 men in Buch's car had perished, and the rest clung to life by the thinnest thread. The prisoners were transported to hospitals in Frankfurt and Hanover before being imprisoned in a POW camp. When Task Force Baum from Patton's 4th Armored Division tried to liberate the camp, Captain A. Baum was surprised by the large number of prisoners and could not rescue them all. During the attempt, most of Baum's unit was captured, and Buch was recaptured, only to be released 1 week before the war ended. Weak, drained, and on the verge of delirium after enduring so much suffering, Buch would have to be hospitalized for months after the war. Even then, he didn't believe his men had accomplished anything extraordinary. He reflected, quote, "We were in those foxholes, and what we did was to defend ourselves and try to live through it." As the months became years and the final days of World War II were properly explored, Buch realized the importance of their actions that fateful day. He learned that they had actually held back an entire element of the 1st Battalion, 9th Fallschirmjäger Regiment, 3rd Fallschirmjäger Division of about 500 men. By doing so, the tiny American force managed to throw a wrench into the 6th Panzer Army's march toward Antwerp, reshaping the destiny of one of the war's most pivotal and protracted battles. At 4:30 a.m. on December 17th, more than 18 hours behind schedule, the 1st SS Panzer Division finally left Lanzerath and drove northwest for Buchholz Station. The entire timetable of the German advance on the River Meuse and Antwerp had been severely crippled, allowing the Americans precious hours to move in reinforcements. This delay proved to be crucial in the overall outcome of the Battle of the Bulge, as it provided the Allies with the necessary time to regroup and counter the German offensive. It would take years to achieve the recognition they deserved, but every veteran from Lanzerath Ridge was eventually awarded the Presidential Unit Citation. 4 received the Distinguished Service Cross, 5 the Silver Star, and 9 the Bronze Star, with V device for their 10-hour ordeal against a 500-man German battalion. Their names, etched in the passages of history, Bourke's platoon would forever be remembered as the most decorated unit of its size in all of World War II. The English Channel, ferrying legions of paratroopers bracing for the jump of their lives. Among these airborne warriors was a squad that stood out, sporting mohawk haircuts and war paint. This band of brothers, led by the wild-hearted Jake McNasty McNeese, shared laughs amidst the chaos, defiant in the face of the relentless German anti-aircraft fire tearing through the night sky and bursting all around them. That's when the inevitable happened. Their Skytrain was pummeled by the enemy's flak, sending it into a perilous descent. In the frantic intermittent darkness, McNeese rallied his troops. The cabin was bathed in a red glow, a prelude to battle, pushing the men to their feet amidst the din of explosions and gunfire. They were over France, and the moment the first man was about to jump, disaster struck. A flak shell pierced the aircraft's belly. Willie Green's backpack was hit and unraveled his parachute across the inside of the hull. He was now blocking the jump door. With the C-47 now falling into pieces and plummeting from the sky, Willie fought to corral his chute and clear a path for his brothers in arms before they all crashed into the ground. Just as he managed to clear the way, McNeese took the leap into the storm of flak over Normandy. Seconds later, the sky was lit as their Skytrain was consumed in a fiery blast. McNeese thought he would never see Willie again, yet this was no time for grief. Jake and the infamous Filthy 13 were now deep behind enemy lines, tasked with a mission that could alter the course of history. Jake McNeese was tempered by fire from the cradle. Growing up during the Great Depression, he started working at age 10 to help his family make ends meet. This early test set him apart when he returned to school, excelling in football and serving as a firefighter. He was known as a rebel who played to win at all costs and became the protector of the underdog, a nightmare for any bully daring enough to cross his path. Jake's reputation as someone who defied convention and faced challenges head-on was cemented by those who knew him, encapsulated in a teacher's observation that he, quote, was not afraid of the devil. Shortly after his graduation, the United States entered World War II. Despite having a draft-exempt position as a firefighter, Jake was drawn irresistibly toward the tumult of war, spurred on by a desire to escape the aftermath of a bar fight that threatened legal repercussions. Enlisting offered him an escape and an opportunity to serve on his terms. Disdainful of the conventional infantry's passive posture, Jake was captivated by the daring of the paratrooper program, promising direct engagement with the enemy. This path appealed to his nature, envisioning himself not as a mere soldier, but as a warrior facing the enemy on his own terms in the thick of the action. Jake would later articulate his philosophy with stark clarity. If anybody wanted to take his life, quote, I wanted to look him in the eye. Creating an American paratrooper division from scratch in the middle of the most devastating war humanity had ever faced was nothing short of a high-stakes gamble. The United States, having seen the destructiveness of the German Fallschirmjäger, could no longer afford to be a mere spectator. The Germans' airborne operations had showcased the game-changing power of paratroopers, capable of altering the course of a battle by striking swiftly and forcefully behind enemy lines, leaving their opponents staggered. It wasn't just the enemy bullets that posed a threat to a paratrooper. Jumping into hostile grounds was fraught with peril. The blunt warning to Jake McNeese highlighted the grim reality. Out of every 1,000 men who aspired to conquer the skies, only 10 would endure the brutal training and tests to claim their wings. But Jake wasn't deterred. His street smarts and knack for unconventional thinking had always paved the way for him. There was no question in his heart. He was born to be among that distinguished group of 10. While the rigorous demands of paratrooper training pushed many to their limits, Jake McNeese rose rapidly as a standout recruit. His hunger for challenge knew no bounds. Where others faltered, Jake only grew more eager. However, his exceptional physical abilities were equally matched by his rebellious streak. Jake quickly became notorious throughout the camp. Jake's blatant refusal to adhere to military protocol, especially his refusal to salute or properly address officers, opting instead for cheeky nicknames, was just the beginning of his defiance. His tendency to resolve disputes with his fists, rather than words, didn't just involve fellow recruits. It led to frequent disciplinary actions. However, his extension of this combative attitude to physically confronting officers marked a turning point, significantly intensifying the consequences he faced. This seemingly trivial dispute escalated into a physical altercation with the mess officer, cementing Jake's reputation as a troublemaker and raising concerns about his impact on morale. To curb his influence, Jake was transferred to a unit tailor-made for the Army's most unmanageable rebels, dubbed the Dirty Five. Stationed in a rundown tent in Georgia, their living conditions were as unconventional as their attitudes. Eschewing cleanliness for practicality, they became known for their disregard for personal hygiene, earning their nickname with pride. Their defiance didn't stop at poor hygiene. Jake and his crew were notorious for missing roll calls, drunkenness, and engaging in bar fights. Their rebellious streak peaked one night when Jake intervened to protect a friend from military police, leading to a chaotic showdown that left the officers injured and bewildered. This incident led to Jake being conspicuously passed over for promotion, a deliberate rebuke for his actions. Yet, despite his disciplinary issues, the military recognized Jake's invaluable skills, keeping him in the ranks against advice to discharge him. When someone suggested to Jake's commander that he should discharge him, he responded, quote, "McNeese isn't hurting anything. There will be a time when you'll be awful glad to have McNeese around." When they landed in England, the Dirty Five had transformed into the Filthy 13. They got busy practicing parachute jumps, gearing up for D-Day. Jumping was no joke. Even in peacetime, Jake had seen too many close calls. Parachute malfunctions weren't rare, and he'd seen friends meet their end in tragic ways, one crashing into a farmhouse and another into a beehive, getting stung so badly he was shipped back stateside. Despite the dangers, the Filthy 13 thrived on the adrenaline rush. When they weren't skydiving, they were the life of the party back at camp, always finding ways to blow off steam. Just days before heading to Normandy, during an advanced demolition drill, Jake couldn't resist pulling a fast one, rigging a tree to explode near a patrolling soldier, causing quite the scare. Their stunt landed the whole crew in hot water with the top brass. But after a few days of silence from the group, with no one to spill the beans, they were let off the hook to join the Normandy operation. On the eve of their departure, Jake turned heads with his face paint and a mohawk, explaining it was a nod to his Native American heritage, a mix of tradition and tactical savvy, as he figured the paint would help him blend in behind enemy lines. Only part of the story was true. Jake's mother was half Choctaw, but everything else was made up by Jake. Pretty soon, the whole squad was in on the act, buzzing their hair into mohawks and slapping on war paint. As they climbed aboard the aircraft, they looked more like fierce warriors from another era than soldiers about to drop into Nazi-occupied France. And then the world caught a glimpse. Photos of these wild-looking troops hit the newspapers, and suddenly, everyone wanted to know what the Filthy 13 were capable of. As the deployment neared, Jake McNeese's role underwent a significant shift. Initially assigned a support task, his mission was escalated to a critical operation. His team was tasked with demolishing the bridges under the Douve Canal before seizing and securing the main bridge, a strategic move for hindering enemy reinforcements during the invasion. Understanding the mission's high stakes and the likelihood of casualties, Jake requested reinforcements, adding 6 more paratroopers to his squad. He was under no illusion about the dangers ahead, realistically anticipating that he might lose half of his men during the operation. Their departure was set for 11 p.m. on June 5, 1944, joining the massive fleet of nearly 1,000 C-47S, each aircraft carrying brave souls ready for battle. The night was clear, and the mood among the paratroopers was a mix of anticipation and resolve, but the serenity was short-lived. Roughly 20 minutes into their flight, the first bursts of enemy flak illuminated the sky around them, a stark reminder of the peril they were flying into. The situation quickly deteriorated into chaos. Jake's plane was caught in the thick of heavy anti-aircraft fire, losing altitude rapidly. The paratroopers were forced to jump much sooner than planned. Jake's escape was narrow. He bailed out moments before the aircraft was consumed by flames in a devastating explosion that claimed several of his comrades. Willie Green was not among them. Somehow, some way, the man whose parachute had been tragically hit by enemy fire somehow made it to the ground. Army documents suggest he was later rescued from Stalag prisoner camp in Prussia almost a year later. That night, The skies over Britain bore witness to a mission fraught with heartbreak. Half of the team who soared towards destiny would never see home again. Among them is the legendary Filthy 13, led by Jake, who saw more than half of his squad vanish in the chaos of the drop and the harrowing moments that followed. Yet, in the rubble and ruin of Normandy, a trio of the Filthy 13's gritty survivors managed to find each other. Their ranks swelled by a dozen disparate US paratroopers, cut off from their own units in the confusion of battle. From the instant their boots hit the ground, they were under siege. German bullets hailed down. But these Americans had a secret weapon, the distinct crack of their rifles. This sonic signature allowed them to locate and rally to one another, standing shoulder to shoulder against the German onslaught, turning the tide with every pull of the trigger. Jake and his squad clawed their way to the heart of the Douve Canal, taking out minor bridges before zeroing in on the main prize. Their mission: seize control of the main bridge, transforming it into a vital conduit for American forces. And if they couldn't hold the line, they were to reduce it to rubble, ensuring it wouldn't serve the Germans as a reinforcement pathway to the beachheads. In a display of sheer tenacity, the Filthy 13 entrenched themselves on one flank of the bridge, locking it down against German advances. For 3 grueling days, they weathered a relentless storm of German firepower from across the canal. Believing Jake's unit to be decimated, the US command called in a squadron of P-51 Mustangs to obliterate the bridge. Slicing through the sky, the Mustangs laid waste to the bridge, hammering both German and US positions along the canal's edges. Miraculously, Jake and his warriors, sheltered in their foxholes, emerged from the dust unscathed, ready to continue their defense. As the days wore on, the German forces found themselves on the back foot, retreating from the beachheads. Over 700 of the enemy were now ensnared in a flooded trap near Jake's stronghold, with his ranks now bolstered to 40 men. In an act tinged with desperation, the German commander offered Jake an out, proposing surrender to spare his men from annihilation. Jake's retort was as defiant as it was bold. Surrender was not in their lexicon, but they'd gladly accept the enemy's capitulation. Infuriated by the slight, the German officer ordered an all-out assault. Cool as ever, Jake instructed his men to hold fire until the enemy was fully exposed. Armed to the teeth with machine guns, mortars, and a daunting arsenal, they were a force to be reckoned with. As the Germans charged halfway to their target, Jake gave the signal. The ensuing barrage was a maelstrom of destruction, claiming the lives of nearly 700 enemy combatants in a brutal show of Jake's strategic prowess and the spirit of his men. Jake and his notorious Filthy 13, whose ranks swelled to over 30 different souls, carved a path of destruction through enemy lines, savoring every clash with the Axis powers. Despite facing severe injuries and almost insurmountable odds, Jake persevered, executing mission after mission with a blend of courage and sheer audacity. He'd often say his survival was thanks to his unyielding rebellious spirit and a penchant for pushing the envelope. Paratroopers were already among the elite, the cream of the crop of American soldiers known for their aggressiveness and skill. Jake amplified this reputation, transforming it into a full-fledged nightmare for the Axis forces. Jake's father captured the essence of his son's wartime philosophy with a poignant observation about his use of fear as a weapon. Quote, "I think he was trying to build upon the idea that if they're scared of us as crazy paratroopers, well, this just makes us look crazier." Jake became one of the rare paratroopers to complete 4 combat jumps and live to recount these daring exploits. His journey didn't stop after Normandy. He soared through the skies into the Netherlands as part of Operation Market Garden, dropped into Germany before the Battle of the Bulge for vital reconnaissance missions, and, as the conflict neared its end, he trained as a pathfinder. Contrary to his expectations of winding down the war in an English camp, he parachuted into Bastogne, guiding crucial resupply drops amidst the fierce winter battle. In 2012, the French Republic honored Jake with the Legion of Honor Chevalier class, recognizing his valorous contributions to France. The military brass, initially wary of Jake's unruly behavior, eventually recognized the invaluable role he and his Filthy 13 played in the war effort. This ragtag group transcended their wild reputation, securing their place in history for their unique battle dress and their extraordinary feats of valor. Together with historian Kaleo Griffith, Jake McNeice chronicled his thrilling wartime saga in The Filthy 13, from the Dust Bowl to Hitler's Eagle's Nest. ensuring that the tales of bravery, resilience, and a touch of madness that defined his unit would inspire generations to come. Britain was on the edge of defeat, her back against the wall. The once proud British Expeditionary Force had been battered and nearly annihilated at Dunkirk. Above London, the skies thundered with the relentless onslaught of German bombers. In a desperate bid for survival, Britain reached across the Atlantic, requesting aid in the form of any modern aircraft. The United States, with its dormant aircraft industry, could only offer a trickle of support. The British Royal Air Force got their hands on P-40 Warhawks, but it was a drop in the ocean. The world-spanning conflict demanded more, much more. When the Curtiss Corporation could not meet the demand for P-40 fighters, Britain's desperate gaze turned to James H. Kindleberger, the leader of a newly born aircraft manufacturer. Kindleberger came up with a wild pitch. He couldn't just deliver those P-40 fighters Britain desperately needed, but he could do one better. He swore he could design a brand new aircraft that would knock anything out of the sky and have it ready in no more than 120 days. Kindleberger was on the edge of birthing the most aerodynamically sleek pursuit plane ever conceived, the P-51 Mustang. Fast, nimble and tough, this bird was set to turn the tide of war. But the Mustang's first flights uncovered a crippling Achilles heel, a defect so severe the United States Army Air Corps washed its hands of it. Relegated to the sidelines, the Mustang was doomed to obscurity, performing escort and recon missions. Yet the saga of the Mustang was far from over, as destiny still had one card to play. In the wake of Dunkirk's chaotic retreat, Britain stood defiant but nearly alone against the Nazi onslaught. With France falling in June 1940, the skies over Britain soon became the battleground for the Luftwaffe's aggressive push, igniting the Battle of Britain in July. The threat of invasion cast a dark shadow over the nation, severely under-equipped with modern fighters to counter the devastating Blitz. Britain's Royal Air Force found itself dwarfed by the overwhelming might of Germany's upgraded Luftwaffe. In dire need of additional firepower, Britain cast an urgent plea to its resilient ally, the United States, for any available aircraft to bolster its thinning ranks. The United States, ensnared in the delicate balance between neutrality in Europe's conflict and loyalty to Great Britain, faced its own challenges. Its aviation industry, still in a peacetime slumber, was ill-prepared for the monumental task of supplying the volume of warplanes Britain desperately required. In a decisive move, the US authorized the transfer of numerous Curtiss P-40 Warhawks, a mainstay in its arsenal, to the United Kingdom. These Warhawks swiftly adapted to European combat standards, outperformed British expectations, and became a pivotal force in their air defense. By 1940, Britain's demand for P-40S surged as the conflict intensified. British leaders engaged Curtiss in negotiations for hundreds more fighters, but were met with a production bottleneck. This impasse drove the British to seek alternatives. North American Aviation Corporation, a newcomer yet a proven partner with Britain in designing advanced trainers, entered the picture. Their previous success made the British confident North American aviation could address their urgent needs. Faced with the challenge, North American aviation prepared to manufacture the P-40 Warhawks, aligning their production capabilities with Britain's demands. Yet, the prospect of producing another company's design didn't appeal to North Americans' management. James H. Dutch Kindleberger, the company's president, seized this moment with a visionary proposal. He promised a new fighter to surpass the P-40 in speed, agility, altitude capabilities, and range, all at a lower cost. His pitch was compelling. Quote, "Give us a shot and we'll deliver a game changer." Kindleberger's bold commitment was to have a prototype ready in just 120 days, a testament to his ambition and North America's track record with the British. Convinced by Kindleberger's audacity and North America's demonstrated competence, the British agreed to this daring endeavor. Bombs were falling on London, so the 120-day countdown was ticking. North American aviation plunged into the project with vigor. Their goal was to harness the power of the P-40 Warhawk's Allison engine within a cutting-edge airframe. By December 1940, they unveiled the NA-73X prototype, a feat of engineering that arrived under the 120-day deadline with mere days to spare. This aircraft fused the robust Allison engine's force with an advanced aluminum fuselage and, notably, a laminar flow wing design. The innovation minimized air resistance, boosting speed and range, yet it presented challenges at high altitudes and during low-speed maneuvers, presenting a nuanced advantage in the brutal theater of war. An esteemed test pilot, Vance Breese, took the NA-73X skyward, clocking an impressive 382 miles per hour at 15,000 feet on its first flight. Kindleberger's vision had materialized. The aircraft didn't just meet but exceeded expectations, surpassing the P-40's performance and showcasing superior maneuverability. Impressed by the NA-73X's capabilities, the British aptly named it the Mustang, a moniker destined for fame. However, the United States Army Air Corps greeted the Mustang with tepid interest, conducting evaluations on 2 units, now designated as P-51S. Despite the Mustang's proven might, the US military's higher echelons remained unconvinced, reflecting differing tactical priorities and evaluations between the British and American allies amidst the intensifying global strife. The Army Air Corps recognized the Mustang's prowess. Still, they pinpointed a significant flaw. The Allison engine faltered at high altitudes, particularly beyond 17,000 feet, hampered by the lack of a 2-speed supercharger. This limitation curtailed the Mustang's potential, relegating it to roles of support, reconnaissance and dive bombing, a stark deviation from its creator's loftier ambitions. Betting they could punch above their weight in a pinch, on April 16, 1942, the United States threw down the gauntlet, ordering 500 Mustangs for dive bombing missions, dubbing them the A-36 Apache or Invader. Despite this new nickname, American pilots couldn't shake off the Mustang name, captivated by its raw, gutsy vibe. But even thrown into this fray, the Mustang hit a rough patch. These A-36 Invaders marked the Mustang's combat debut in World War II, but the battlefield quickly exposed a critical flaw: its vulnerability during dive bombing. As the Mustang decelerated post-dive, it became an easy mark. Its cooling system was its Achilles heel. A single well-aimed shot at the radiator could down the aircraft, a risk magnified during dive recovery. This vulnerability made the US Army Air Corps reconsider the Mustang's role. Falling short as both a high-altitude fighter and a dependable dive bomber, the aircraft shifted to specialized low-altitude missions, avoiding dive bombing to provide airborne artillery support, air support, and skip bombing. Despite these challenges, the Allison-powered Mustang demonstrated its strengths and the flexibility of its design. This period underscored the hurdles of wartime aviation development, reflecting the determination and innovation required to meet the dynamic demands of aerial warfare during World War II. In 1943, as US forces entered the treacherous terrain of Burma, devoid of conventional support avenues, the Mustang emerged as a critical asset. Its ability to provide forward air control and its potent firepower made it indispensable in clearing enemy positions, aiding the progression of American ground forces. The Mustang's agility at low altitudes enabled it to navigate Burma's rugged landscape, supporting infantry before swiftly ascending. Despite initial reservations, the Allison-powered Mustangs earned pilots' respect for their control, reliability, and low-altitude performance. It was precisely one of those pilots who learned the value of the Mustang in the Burmese campaign who first began to ask the right question: why not equip the Mustang with a more capable engine? The British, recognizing the untapped potential of the Allison-equipped Mustang, proposed a revolutionary upgrade, swapping its engine for a Rolls-Royce Merlin, the powerhouse behind the acclaimed Spitfire. This idea took off, with Packard stepping in to adapt the Merlin for the Mustang. The modification unleashed the might of a 1,300 horsepower engine, significantly boosted by an efficient two-stage, two-speed supercharger. Though sharing Allison's 12-cylinder configuration, the Merlin engine outshone it with a superior power-to-weight ratio, better fuel efficiency, and, notably, a robust supercharger. North American aviation quickly modified the Mustang's airframe to house this new engine, setting the stage for a remarkable transformation. This engine swap, coupled with introducing a four-blade propeller and reinforced airframe, notably enhanced the Mustang's high-altitude capabilities. Adjustments to the radiator design bolstered its durability under fire, and the shift from 30mm cannons to .50 caliber Browning machine guns significantly upped its lethal potential. These enhancements morphed the Mustang into an entirely different beast. Far from being just another fighter seeking its place, it ascended to the zenith of World War II aerial combat prowess. With the rollout of the P-51B in November 1942, it flew 30 miles per hour faster than its precursor, boasting a remarkable operational ceiling of 30,000 feet. At this juncture, it dominated adversaries in the air, marking a pivotal shift in the dynamics of aerial warfare. The Mustang, now empowered by the Merlin engine, had established itself as the definitive fighter of the era. Mustang pilots soon discovered an unparalleled advantage: exceptional range. Fitted with a 425-gallon fuel tank and an engine twice as efficient as others, the Mustang could reach beyond 1,080 miles. With additional drop tanks, its range soared to 2,600 miles. Boasting a top speed of 440 miles per hour, an accelerated climb rate and deadly firepower, the Merlin-powered Mustang became an unstoppable force above. Its role in escort missions for B-17 bombers across Europe cannot be overstated. What were once treacherous flights resulting in heavy bomber losses turned into safer missions under the Mustang's vigilant escort. Its superior dogfighting skills and remarkable endurance shielded the bombers from Luftwaffe assaults. The US Army Air Corps, recognizing the Mustang's game-changing impact, placed orders for 2,200 P-51B models. By 1943, these Mustangs were arriving in droves, decisively shifting the war's momentum. Their introduction marked a significant decrease in bomber losses, thanks to the Mustang's protective prowess and extended reach. Beyond their escort duties, these fighters excelled in ground attack missions post-bombing raids, striking German assets with precision. The Merlin-powered Mustangs significantly undermined Germany's fuel and aircraft production capabilities, a blow from which the Luftwaffe could not recover. With the Luftwaffe's diminished presence, Allied bombers flew with greater assurance, guarded by what they warmly referred to as their little friends. By the end of 1943, Mustang production was ramping up, and soon this rising star of a fighter was present in every war theater, operated by almost all Allied forces. But it could still be improved. The P-51B Mustang, already a legend in the skies, was not immune to critique. RAF pilots pinpointed two key areas for improvement. The canopy's design limited rearward visibility, and the aircraft's guns were prone to jamming after executing certain high-intensity maneuvers, a flaw that could critically hamper its combat effectiveness. Heeding these insights, North American aviation embarked on an ambitious upgrade of this battle-proven fighter. The culmination of their efforts was the P-51D, a refined version boasting significant enhancements. Its most notable feature was a new teardrop-shaped canopy, offering pilots a panoramic 360-degree view, a crucial advantage in the frenzied ballet of dogfighting. However, this canopy alteration introduced some stability challenges. To counteract these, a dorsal fin was added to the tail, providing the additional aerodynamic control needed. The wings were also redesigned, accommodating 3.50 caliber Browning machine guns on each side. This increase to 6 guns, coupled with their repositioning, effectively resolved the jamming issue. The P-51D had evolved into the undisputed ultimate fighter of World War II. It soon became the standard bearer across all fronts, its prowess and adaptability unmatched. In 1944, North American aviation was charged with an immense production task, over 8,000 P-51Ds. These new Mustangs swarmed the skies over Germany, escorting the massive Allied bomber fleets and engaging in ground attacks. Their unmatched combination of agility, range, and firepower left other piston-powered aircraft trailing in their wake during dogfights. The P-51D's superiority was so pronounced that it became the gold standard against which other fighters were measured. A defining moment for the P-51D came on March 4, 1944. It was on this day that the Mustang completed its maiden 100-mile journey to Berlin, escorting a vast armada of bombers. This mission signaled the beginning of the end for the Third Reich's reign of terror, as the Mustangs, with their superior capabilities, ensured the success of one of the most critical air raids of the war. The Allies now had in their possession what was arguably the most capable and responsive fighter of the war. It was now up to their pilots to wield it to bring down the Nazi regime. Major George Preddy emerged as the top ace, flying the P-51 Mustang during the war, pushing the aircraft to its full capacity. After enduring a grueling 200-hour combat tour and voluntarily extending his service twice, Preddy chose to stay in the fight, volunteering for an unheard-of third extension. In the fierce 1944 summer engagements over northern France, Preddy shot down 9 enemy aircraft from June 12th to August 5th. Yet his most extraordinary feat was on the horizon. On August 5th, after a day of aerial combat, Preddy joined the 352nd Fighter Group's Warbond Drive celebration. Despite a forecast of thunderstorms that suggested a pause in operations the next day, the weather unexpectedly cleared overnight. Shortly after Preddy had gone to sleep, he was awakened with urgent news. A bombing raid over Berlin was imminent, and he was to lead the mission. Still intoxicated from the previous night's festivities, he accidentally fell off the podium during the mission briefing. His squadron took immediate action to sober him up, using oxygen masks to sharpen his focus and cold water splashes to fully wake him. After regaining his composure, Preddy was escorted to his P-51 Mustang. Despite his rough start, Preddy's skill as a pilot shone the moment he was in the cockpit. His deep bond with the aircraft allowed him to lead his squadron flawlessly towards Berlin. The weather was clear, providing perfect visibility for the mission that lay ahead, and the German Luftwaffe was out in force, setting the stage for an intense confrontation. As the American B-17 bombers neared their objective, they were ambushed by a formation of 30 German Messerschmitt Bf-109S. Hidden from German eyes, Major George Preddy and his squadron of P-51 Mustangs were poised for a counterattack. The Mustangs, celebrated for their speed and agility, were perfect for such sudden strikes. Preddy's initial attack downed a Bf-109, sending it plummeting to the ground, its pilot unseen. He quickly targeted another Bf-109, its left wing root exploding into flames, forcing the pilot to bail out. Preddy's team systematically took apart the German assault. Due to the initial focus of the Messerschmitts on the bombers, they were oblivious to the Mustangs slicing through their formation. Preddy quickly accounted for 2 more Bf-109S, leaving the remaining German pilots in disarray. Attempting escape, they dived towards safety, but the Mustangs, led by Preddy, showed no mercy. Preddy claimed his 5th victory in this dogfight, and soon after engaged with another Bf-109 at just 5,000 feet. The Germans' attempt to evade was futile against Preddy's swift maneuvers and the Mustang's superior speed and firepower. Outflanking his adversary, Preddy fired, forcing another German pilot to eject. Back at Bodny, Preddy stepped out of his Mustang, Cripes a Mighty II, a changed man, visibly affected by the day's events. Combat photographer First Lieutenant George Arnold captured this poignant moment of Preddy, pale and worn, leaving his cockpit. Despite his achievements, Preddy chose not to report his victories, letting his squadron and gun camera footage speak to his actions. The media, drawn by Major George Preddy Jr.'s exploits, celebrated him across Allied Europe, though he remained uneasy with the attention. Lieutenant Colonel John C. Meyer, recognizing Preddy's extraordinary feat, recommended him for the Medal of Honor, but on August 12th, Brigadier General Edward H. Anderson awarded him the Distinguished Flying Cross instead. It was pilots like Preddy and thousands of other brave men who took the P-51 Mustang from a marvel of American engineering to one of the most legendary warbirds of warfare history. Throughout World War II, Mustangs soared as one of the sky's most powerful forces, executing over 213,000 missions. Their combat achievements were staggering, downing 5,000 German aircraft in air battles and destroying another 4,000 on the ground, accounting for half of all American air victories post their deployment. The Mustang's combat effectiveness was unparalleled. Incurring around 2,500 losses due to combat, mechanical failures or pilot errors, its success-to-loss ratio underscored not only the aircraft's superior design and capabilities, but also the valor and adeptness of its pilots. As the Third Reich's grip weakened, Germany turned to its advanced jet and rocket-powered fighters, hoping to counter the Mustang's supremacy. These faster aircraft marked a significant advancement in aviation technology, yet they fell short in endurance and agility compared to the Mustangs. The war's toll on Germany's industrial capabilities meant these revolutionary fighters were too scarce to alter the course of the air war significantly. Mustang pilots leveraged their numerical strength and strategic prowess to neutralize the German jets, targeting them during their takeoff and landing phases and overpowering them in dogfights through superior tactics and numbers. The introduction of jet-powered aircraft, though a leap forward, could not stem the tide against the relentless assault by America's premier World War II fighter. Hermann Göring, the commander of the Luftwaffe and a top Nazi henchman, couldn't hide the stark reality when he saw P-51 Mustangs tearing through the skies over Berlin. His own words lay bare the brutal truth. Quote, "The day I saw Mustangs over Berlin, I knew the jig was up." The once impenetrable German Atlantic Wall lay shattered by the Allied forces storming the beaches of Normandy. As tens of thousands of Allied troops surged into France, a sense of inevitability hung in the air. The Wehrmacht faced the stark reality. Their grip on France was loosening, and the end seemed near. Yet in the shadow of impending defeat, Adolf Hitler refused to relinquish the territories he had so bloodily seized. Ignoring the counsel of his advisors, who urged a strategic withdrawal to fortify the homeland, Hitler commanded a daring counter-offensive to reclaim the Lorraine region in northeastern France. In September 1944, an epic confrontation was coming to Aracourt. Two seasoned commanders, veterans of the Great War and masters of armored warfare, were destined to collide. On one side was US Colonel Bruce Clark, leading his vast 4th Armored Division. On the other was the relentless 5th Panzer Army, commanded by the unyielding General Hasso von Manteuffel. Despite his recognition of the futility of Hitler's grandiose ambitions, von Manteuffel was not a man to surrender to despair. He knew the dream of reclaiming France was a fleeting one. Yet, he was determined to deliver a staggering blow to the overconfident Americans. He planned to unleash a brutal surprise that would rattle the foundations of their presumed victory. Hitler's gambit to recover lost ground in France teetered on the brink of recklessness. The Wehrmacht had already suffered staggering losses, over 300,000 troops, in the Falaise Pocket debacle in northern France just a month earlier. Moreover, their forces were reeling from the punishing blows dealt by the Soviet juggernaut in Operation Bagration on the Eastern Front. General George S. Patton's Third Army was cutting a swath through Lorraine on the Allied side, edging ever closer to the German frontier. Patton, known for his tenacity and aggressive tactics, was not one to ease up on the throttle. The Germans marshaled their newly formed panzer brigades, the armored fist of the Reich, for a massive counter-offensive. They aimed to encircle and crush the advancing Allied forces in a bold pincer movement. Adolf Hitler appointed General Hasso von Manteuffel to spearhead the counteroffensive in Lorraine. Manteuffel, a cavalry officer seasoned by World War I. Manteuffel's military resume was nothing short of impressive. Stephen J. Zaloga, in his book Lorraine 1944, highlights Manteuffel's storied career. He had commanded an infantry battalion under the legendary Desert Fox, General Erwin Rommel, in the 7th Panzer Division during the 1940 France campaign, led a regiment in the bitter cold of Moscow in 1941, and commanded a brigade with the famed Afrika Korps in 1943. Manteuffel had earned Hitler's confidence for this critical mission. His battlefield prowess had been recognized with the prestigious Knight's Cross and an oak leaf, symbols of valor earned through 5 grueling years of armored warfare. However, the units Manteuffel would lead into battle were not the cream of the crop. As Zaloga points out, none were rated at the highest combat effectiveness level, Kampfwertbesserheit. These units were a patchwork of battle-hardened veterans, green underage cadets, and older conscripts, a makeshift force filling the gaps left by heavy casualties. Manteuffel's arsenal, though remarkable in numbers, was not ideal. He had less than 400 artillery pieces at his disposal, and his Panzer Grenadier divisions lacked armor. The real muscle lay in his Panzer brigades, equipped with about 100 of the latest tanks, including the fearsome Tigers and Panthers. In total, Manteuffel had a force of 300 tanks at his command. However, the crews were largely untested in combat, a critical factor in the looming clash. Leading the Allied charge in Lorraine was the legendary, albeit controversial, General George S. Patton, holder of the Distinguished Service Cross from World War I. Colonel Bruce Clark, destined to play a crucial role in the American defense against Manteuffel in Lorraine, later offered a candid assessment of Patton's expertise. He said, quote, "Patton knew as little about tanks as anybody I ever knew." Compared to their German counterparts, Clark's US forces were a well-oiled fighting machine. They were at peak combat readiness, brimming with motivation, well-equipped, and backed by robust artillery support. Despite fielding older models than the enemy's, the US Army's arsenal boasted over 800 functional tanks. This imposing array included M5A1 light tanks, the reliable M4AS, the potent M10S, and the swift M18 tank destroyers. This hardware, combined with the American fighting spirit, lay in wait for a monumental clash in the Lorraine region. On the fog-laden morning of September 18th, the German 111th Panzer Brigade launched a surprise armored assault on Luneville. The American forces, caught off guard, suffered tank losses in the initial skirmish. Just as the Germans were maneuvering to encircle the Americans from the northeast and southeast, timely reinforcements thundered in from the 4th and 6th Armored Divisions, bolstered by a company of tanks and tank destroyers. However, the German attack faltered and retreated the following day, leaving behind more than 24 destroyed panzers and approximately 1,000 soldiers. The American side, too, counted their losses in the hundreds. US Colonel Clark, recognizing the sudden shift from offensive to defensive operations, strategically retained his artillery near a fortified perimeter in Aracourt. In a cunning move, he messaged, quote, "Send quick forays out at night to hit the fortified enemy-held towns and return fast inside the perimeter." The German 5th Panzer Army, having failed in their objective to seize Luneville, refocused their efforts on Aracourt. On the morning of September 19th, panzer units began to amass south and east of Clark's position. They bided their time, waiting for additional units to join before launching their attack. The fate of Aracourt hung in the balance. Colonel Clark seized the initiative, ordering an immediate assault on the outnumbered German forces. 2 platoons of tank destroyers and a company of Sherman tanks launched a bold charge towards the enemy panzers. Under the concealment of the dense fog, American forces deftly flanked the German positions, swiftly destroying 10 panzers. However, this aggressive maneuver was not without cost. The Americans sustained significant casualties, falling under the relentless assault of nearby Panther tanks. Fueled by desperation and strategic foresight, General Manteuffel orchestrated a last-ditch charge against the entrenched American forces in Aracourt. His objective was unambiguous and critical: to penetrate the stalwart defenses of General Clark's position and incapacitate the distant artillery emplacements that were systematically pummeling his panzer divisions. But the US forces were not only remarkable in numbers and firepower, they were also creative and resourceful. During the offensive on September 20th, US pilot Major Charles Carpenter, famous for his unconventional use of a light aircraft in combat, burst into the battlefield to show why he was nicknamed Bazooka Charlie. He had gained a remarkable reputation for ingeniously modifying his L-4 Grasshopper observation plane, ingeniously equipping it with bazookas. This adaptation transformed the aircraft, originally designed for reconnaissance and artillery spotting, into a devastating low-flying tank destroyer. Utilizing this modified aerial arsenal, he aggressively engaged the enemy's armored might. Charlie masterfully maneuvered his plane in a series of calculated, low-altitude dives, unleashing a relentless barrage of bazooka rockets upon the unsuspecting German tank units below. In each pass, his precise strikes wreaked havoc, demonstrating both the ingenuity of his modifications and his own unyielding combat spirit. Charlie's bold actions led to the destruction of 6 tanks, among them a powerful Tiger I, solidifying his status as a World War II aerial legend. As the sun set on a day marked by intense armored warfare, the US 37th Tank Battalion emerged with a significant tally of destruction, having obliterated 16 enemy tanks across the scattered villages and the patchwork of fields. This feat of combat prowess significantly diminished the initial strength of the 111th and 113th German Panzer Brigades, reducing their impressive count of 180 tanks to a mere 60, a testament to the tenacity and skill of the American forces. Meanwhile, the less experienced German tank crews, despite their relative lack of battle-hardened expertise, managed to inflict substantial damage upon the US tanks, leveling the field with losses that mirrored their own. However, the impact of this loss was asymmetrically devastating for the panzer units. The superficial appearance of parity in strength belied a deeper strategic disparity. The German forces, already stretched thin in resources, lacked the capacity to replenish their diminished armored ranks. Still, Manteuffel would not yield before the overwhelming odds strangulated his position. During the following days, Manteuffel seized control of the Bezang forest area to advance through the village of Lezay and attack it from the north. With the support of a dozen tanks, the Panzer Grenadiers unleashed their might near the village of Ley, successfully decimating 4 US Stuart tanks in a brutal display of firepower. However, their triumph was short-lived, as Hellcats from the Tank Destroyer Battalion swiftly entered the fray. These agile destroyers engaged in a fierce counterattack, obliterating 3 German panzers with devastating efficiency before tactically retreating from the battlefield. By noon on September 22nd, amidst the smouldering remains and echoes of battle, German forces in Juvisy and Lezay momentarily ceased their advance, taking a much-needed respite. As the days wore on, the tide of battle gradually shifted. General Manteuffel's forces began to dwindle, their numbers and morale eroding under the constant pressure of combat. In stark contrast, the American forces, led by the resolute Colonel Clark, found new strength and momentum. The skies above, once a murky canvas of war, cleared, heralding the arrival of P-47 Thunderbolts. These swift and lethal aircraft, responding to the call for air support, soared over the battlefield with a menacing presence. They unleashed a torrent of ordnance upon every German formation in sight, turning the region into a maelstrom of explosions and chaos. Each strike from these thundering warbirds further bolstered the American advance, slowly tipping the scales in their favor. By September 26th, the fiercely ravaged German forces focused their determined gaze on Château Salins, nearly overpowering the American troops before the intervention of air and artillery support compelled the Germans into a strategic withdrawal. In a final, desperate attempt to shatter the Allied defenses and retain their grip on Hill 265, the 5th Panzer Army launched a bold offensive against US forces on September 29th. However, the Germans faced a crushing defeat, suffering the loss of 36 tanks and approximately 700 soldiers in the fierce confrontation. The Battle of Haraucourt culminated in a stalemate, carving its place in history as one of the fiercest armored engagements witnessed on the Western Front. To the chagrin of Adolf Hitler, the German offensive only managed a temporary halt of the American-led push into southeastern France. Once General George S. Patton's forces were replenished with fuel and supplies, they resumed their advance with unyielding determination, pushing deep into the heart of Germany. Had it not been for Dwight D. Eisenhower's recent agreement with the Soviet Union to halt at the outskirts of Berlin, Patton might very well have been the first to march into the German capital. Patton's penchant for offensive warfare was undeniable. This sentiment was echoed by General Major Friedrich von Mellenthin, Chief of Staff of the 5th Panzer Army, who observed, quote, "On September 21st, it looked as though the Americans were determined to force their way through to the Saar and the Rhine, and General Patton might well have done so if he had been given a free hand." At that time, the West Wall was still unmanned, and no effective defense could have been made there. Meanwhile, General Manteuffel's forces were left reeling with barely 25 tanks operational. After 11 grueling days at Aracourt, Manteuffel's once mighty panzer formations and armored units had fallen victim to the relentless pounding of US artillery and tanks. The battered remnants of the German forces retreated from Lorraine towards the Siegfried Line, preparing to defend German soil. They would continue to resist the Allied advance until the Reich capitulated to the Western Front before the summer of 1945.